Christine Lagarde, I believe her name is, the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, has to say about virtual currencies.
And small item, maybe nothing to worry about. But just like so many things, it's a bit like the tale of two cities. It was the best of time, it was the worst of times. Well, virtual currencies, you could argue, is extremely beneficial. Beneficial for the customers. It brings better value, it reduces costs, it provides financial inclusion, it provides versatility, it reaches out to places where people were not bankable, in some very far and remote places where technology is beginning to make huge entries. That's the best of time. Worst of time, it's a great instrument for crime, because a lot of it has nothing to do with central control, with the central banks, with supervision, with regulatory environment, and it's a very nice way, and people who look into how terrorism is financed will tell you a lot more than I would, but I've heard them. But it's certainly a potential instrument for illicit transactions, for money laundering, for terrorist financing. Equally, if it was to develop significantly, it would be also a potential threat to financial stability, because it's completely outside the realm of regulated activity. And
Alright, so what Christine was saying is pretty obvious. She doesn't see cryptos as a threat now, but just to be safe, they have already prepared the argument to shut it down if it becomes too popular and seems to be a threat to financial stability, as she calls it, which is just a propagandist way of saying, my job. Let's move on to a part of the conference that I found very interesting, where the audience, full of mutual fund managers, CEOs of financial institutions, and economists, share their opinion on the future of cryptos.
How many of you have ever used a robo-advisor? Okay, 3 of you, 4 of you. Interesting. And how many of you have faith that blockchain is a viable product or process that will actually form part of financing in the next, say, 4 or 5 years? Someone's put 2 hands up. There's such an enthusiast.
CEO for blockchain.
Okay, right. Exactly. Well, okay. Well, that I must say, okay, bad news. That's only about a third. The other 2/3 of the audience are looking a bit suspicious about this.
What? Bad news? It's only about a third? My guess is the other 2/3 just haven't done their research yet. They've probably listened to the propaganda from the top down, saying that it's just a doomed currency model. Although I'm being pretty harsh, I'm not calling the most successful bankers in the world stupid. After watching the whole section, it's clear to me that most of the speakers really have done their homework on cryptos. They just seem to be putting up a front and acting like it's not a big deal, probably in order to keep it out of the headlines for now. I mean, they don't want the word Bitcoin plastered on the front of every newspaper in the whole world, where people can go out and research it for themselves. And then maybe it's not a big deal to them. Maybe they think it's too complicated for the average person to understand, and thus use, for the time being anyway. They probably foresee good economic times ahead, which will strengthen the trust in banks and not give people a reason to turn to Bitcoin as a store of wealth. With all things considered, it seems that Bitcoin's biggest hurdles in the future will be becoming understood, becoming trusted, and becoming easy to use first, and then probably facing massive regulation and propaganda attempts by banks and governments thereafter. I think what Bitcoin needs, as hard as it is to say, is actually a severe economic recession, which will both distract the bankers who will be focusing on keeping their borrowers from becoming delinquent, while simultaneously ruining the trust in fiat currency, banks, and the government, making Bitcoin and other cryptos seem more like a stable and secure option. After the economy stabilizes, Bitcoin will have become too widespread to start the tough regulation needed to stop it. It would kind of be like, starting a forest fire while distracting the firefighters with a car crash, to put it in some pretty terrible terms that are easy to understand. So, objectively, who do you think will win? The banks or the cryptos, or maybe somewhere in between? Uh, Put your arguments in the comments below, and thanks for watching Let's Invest.